Hi, everybody. We're live with
Hello,
the
Musty
Punisher
Wargamers.
and
Shavealiciousness. It's a bit of an inside thing. You'd have to watch my last Heresy update to know what I'm talking about. Or Palmer, aka Palmer.
well, you got two guys that like a clean shave.
That's right. That's right.
I don't like anything on my face.
Well, looks like I think we got an interesting evening going for tonight. You've got some interesting weather. It's a possibility you may be ported to the space station, or no?
I don't think it's going to be bad enough.
Okay.
But there's, it looks like there's enough maybe to throw out some lightning and thunder. So it's at that level.
Yeah.
But we don't know if it's going to do what one way or another.
Well, if we see some lines going through your screen, we'll know what's happening.
Yeah.
So looks like we may have somebody in the house just kind of coming in. I see another, unless it's you and me there watching, but there you go.
Yeah, we got no comments right now.
Not yet. So what have you been up to as far as painting, gaming, or anything? Or
other than playing my board game that's behind us, which over there, you can see it.
Right.
It's in the reflection. I've been playing that. Last night's the first night I haven't played it in a while. It's one of those things where I stayed up to 3 o'clock in the morning to do a lot of painting. So I spent 4 hours last night painting.
Oh, wow. That's good.
So I could get
Fair
something
bit of time
done. And I put the last bit of flock on some miniatures just as the buzzer was going off to say dinner was ready to come out of the oven.
Nice. So this is on your AWI stuff.
Yes. So I have it.
Looks like we got Clark in the house.
Yeah. There we
Hello,
go.
Clark. Very cool. Nice, very British looking display there.
Yeah.
Nice red and whites.
Yeah, they these are my light bobs, the 33rd. Let's get this bent down a little bit. There we go. That's nice. The 33rd Foot Regiment. This is the light infantry segment of them. And obviously the white is really bright with the everything, so it's kind of bleeding out because everything coming off the side over here. But
yeah, that tends to happen.
Yeah, it's I finished these up. I have even just got done flocking just before dinner, and so they're done. I just have to seal them up, and probably maybe if the weather's right tomorrow, I'll do that.
Yep.
So.
Cool. What about your musty drink? You got a musty drink tonight?
Yes, I do.
What do we got there? I can't see through the reflection. Oh, nice. Drinking some rum tonight.
Yes.
Har, har, har.
There'll be some power to be done tonight. We're going to get ourselves some wenches. So.
Settle down.
I like rum every once.
Settle down, Beavis.
So, cheers, mate.
Yeah, cheers. I'll have to.
I love this stuff because it smells like has a good smell of like raisins and cherry and stuff like that. It's very tasty stuff. Nice. And you're back.
Yeah. Well, I'll start with my musty drink just because so we can
compare
notes. The toast. Yeah, I have. Yeah, I've given it away. I have some Philips shortwave. It's like shortwave radio. And this is from Victoria, BC. I've actually, I think I had a Philips in the last show or two. I
might have had some Philips while I was over in Victoria.
Okay. Yeah, probably. It's been around for a while.
Yeah.
So this is 5.2%. So relatively reasonable kind of alcohol level. This is a pale ale. And I kind of like this one. It's see here, the color. It's it's a pale ale, so it's not going to be really, really dark.
It'll be tasty.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And so I haven't been gaming lately as much, so I don't really have anything to share when it comes to that. But I do have, and I'll just switch the camera here to have these guys here. And
Marines, we are
leaving. Yeah, so I have my Marines are fairly complete. Like I haven't done the bases, but I have to do some metallics on the buckles and things like that, and I have to do like the sergeants and the officers. They're kind of decorative. What do you call it? Like the threading on like their clothes, the decorative stuff. I have
to frills and stuff.
Yeah. I have to do that, but I pretty much have most of it done. I haven't done my final washes and things either, but yeah, like what I have left to do is very little. Having said that, it's still those washes and like a lot of stuff really add nice effects. So like they're not done yet by far. Like even the officers are really white looking with their jackets because I haven't done my gray washes at the end on them. And so, yeah, and I have to do their caps too, like the embroidery on the top of the caps and stuff. I mean, the tricorns for the officers and things.
So you can use Jacaro orange on the caps?
Are you kidding me? Oh, that's because I've got that Jacaro orange there. Yeah. Well, you know what I used that for? One of the guys has got red hair. One of the guys has got red hair that I have in here, and that's what the whole bottle is there for, just one of those guys. I think it's this guy. No, it's one of them. One of them's got red hair. But and that's the only reason it's there. And then I kind of just started organizing. I got bases out and I stripped the Weird Boy that I showed for our challenge. So I'm hoping on Saturday/Sunday to be starting on the challenge as far as getting everybody primed. This is the Weird Boy I just stripped, and he's got a plastic arm, but yeah, he's got his stick there, the staff. I've got all my guys I found bases, and I got them all matched up and kind of ready to go to get primed and glued onto their bases. So that'll start this weekend for those that are joining us or even just observing the challenge. Yeah, just going to getting started with that. And that's about it. Like I'm not doing too much else.
Yeah, I would say I'll probably start my challenge tomorrow.
Okay.
Since I just finished these guys up. I still have to prime some of the like 12 of them yet.
Yeah.
So that's what I have to do with mine to get fully started. But I have those 15 that I just have to finish them. There's a little bit of work left of them, so I can finish those while I'm waiting for an opportune time to prime. I should have done it today, but it was kind of sprinkly. When I thought about it, it's like, oh, it's kind of sprinkling out. So then the sun came out, and I never went back out and did it.
Now, I know I saw your challenge because you're doing the high elves, but I don't remember whether I saw it on Facebook or on YouTube. Like, did you put up a video?
I did a video.
Okay, that's right. You did a video. Yeah, I knew I saw it I thought I saw it in more than one spot. But yeah, okay, so you've already done yours. I'll probably do a video soon once I get these guys on basis and prime, just sort of kicking it off on the YouTube channel.
Yeah. Yeah, you did your video, and I think I did mine just right after yours. So it was,
okay.
Because mine came out on the 1st. And I think yours came out, was it the 1st or the 30th? I can't remember.
I'm not really sure because to be honest, like even for the folks that are doing it, like we've been pretty easy going as far as the timing of the dates, right? Like, as far as it's meant to be the month of May, but we're getting started a little late, which we often do. And we usually finish a little late or, like it doesn't really matter to me, right? Are you there? Oh, gosh. Rusty. Mr. Freeze. Let's check here on. Okay. I think we lost Rusty for a second there. Maybe
I'm here.
Oh, you're back. Mr. Freeze is back. You got the thunder and lightning out
Oh
there?
my gosh. I'm not sure what's going on. Let me check I'll check the radar real quick.
Okay.
I checked last time, about an hour ago I checked.
I just checked the stream on YouTube just to see what was going on. Just looked like you definitely dropped out there.
Yeah. There's definitely raining out there.
Okay.
And, oh yeah. It's like a little bit of thunder over top of this right now.
Mm-hmm.
Just a little bit. Well, I might explain a little bit. It's typically when it starts raining around here, connection starts going downhill.
Maybe you had a murder bee land on your tower.
Oh, that could be. It's like they're about that size, you know. I did I send you that video about that guy got stung by one?
Yeah.
On purpose?
Yeah, I saw that.
Oh my God. He's like, it's swelled up.
So I did actually forget in my update that I did purchase this actually off Amazon.
Oh yeah.
I had it on my iPad. Like I had someone that someone sent me, but I actually always like to get my own copy of things.
Yeah.
And this was actually real cheap though. It was like 26 Canadian, which that's like $20 or $18. And this is a great book. I mean, like this is a really great rule set, and it's actually a lot of material in here. This isn't a small book, really.
No, that's a lot. It's like I probably could. No, I'm not.
When it's a lot of text. I mean, if you look at it, these are the pages of the book, almost the entire book. And so I'm actually eyeing. I've got a couple of my. After we do our challenge, rather than jumping right into Warhammer Fantasy, because I've been going back and forth between Warhammer Fantasy and French Indian War for a while now, I'm looking at doing some unfinished business for a bit, you know, as far as painting. And once I finish my unfinished business, I need more unfinished business, right? And so I'm thinking that I'm looking at maybe doing some ancients for DBA and 15 mil. Like I already have my India army and I have some Egyptians, but I'm looking at doing some Romans and some like ancient Germans and things like that for 15 mil for DBA. After I get other projects out of the way, and because I really enjoy DBA, I've played it and I really enjoy it.
I haven't played DBA since the 90s.
Okay,
that's where my rule book I have is from way back then.
Yeah,
and yeah, we used to play it at the club. Whenever we get together, and everybody had a DBA army or two. Yeah, it's as you know, it's one of those games that you can play really quick, and it's not really hard. It's simple, and I always like to look at it as an entry game for getting people into the game, teach them about 15 mil and all that kind of stuff.
Looks like Dan's in the house.
Yeah, hey,
hello, Dan Boomin.
How's the weather over there, Dan?
See, I would say that, and I probably don't have as much experience with DBA as you. I probably have, I'm going to say 7 or 8 games, but I think that DBA is kind of like chess in some ways. It's kind of got that aspect of complexity within simplicity, and that you can go as far as you want with it. Like there is quite a bit of a rabbit hole because we've talked about this on the channel, you know, like, or on the show, like it's got its own game without the variety of armies that you could play almost with just red and black. Like you could use, or white and black. Like you could play DBA without all of the army lists and have equal armies, just like blue blocks and red blocks. And it would be a fairly simple, but still it would be a game actually. But when you superimpose like the army lists and the rules for different armies onto it, I find that it can actually be quite interesting. Like it's a pretty interesting game, strategic, and you're right. It's kind of fast. It's a fast playing game, but you can play 2 out of 3. Like you can play one of those things where you play 3 games and it doesn't take that long.
Yeah, that's one of those games where you get some flavor, a little bit of flavor with each army group. You know, they're set up slightly different, or they have different style of miniatures that, add something different. Paul, yay. Yeah, because it would be morning over there, wouldn't it?
Hey, Paul.
And so right now I have I got Dark Age, Saxon, Viking, and somebody. I used to have Romans, Greeks, and early. What the heck are those guys? Like Assyrians, I think it was.
Hello, very silent mouse. Good morning. Got another gentleman just joined in. So yeah, I have Egyptians and in 15 mil that I've not painted up yet, and I have the India army that I've painted up for DBA 15 mil, and so I'm looking at. Now those were gifted to me, and so I didn't really pick them out myself. However, I do like them; they're nice miniatures, but they're not ones that I sought out and bought myself. I kind of had them gifted to me for free, which is awesome. But I'm looking at buying some Romans and some like ancient Germans and doing some ancients in 15 mil. I think it'd be fun. So, and I've never played any ancients gaming before, really, to be honest.
Oh yeah, you are moving. Clark is moving, isn't it? That would put a damper, along with all the stuff that's happening right now. That kind of puts a damper on it even more. So, yeah,
Paul, we're talking about DBA. I just kind of mentioned that I had it on an electronic copy, but I saw a sale on Amazon, and I've played DBA. I've had like 7 games over the last couple of years because I have some friends that are really quite into it, and I really enjoyed it. Really enjoyed the game quite a bit. And so I'm looking at doing picking up a couple of more armies and painting up. They're going to, once I finish my unfinished business that I already have in the near future that I'm pulling out, then I'm going to need some more unfinished business. And I think that's what this is going to be, a couple of DBA armies that are on the shelf to paint.
Yeah, I should do sometime whenever I'm done clearing off my table back there for the was it Alliance, Empires and Alliance board game. I was thinking about setting up and doing, pulling up my 15 mil stuff and actually showing off my 15 mil armies that I have. Because I did that one, what you were talking about when you were getting into 15 mil for the first time. I did that little video.
With the fantasy stuff too, right?
Yeah, I have fantasy. I got fantasy orcs, elves, dwarves. Yeah. That kind of stuff too. So it's, I should pull them out because I have thousands of 15 mil stuff. So.
Cool. I've got Paul says he's got an Egyptian army, New Kingdom Egyptian army. I honestly don't. I had Egyptians gifted to me, and I've not painted them up yet. I'm not sure like what age they are. I'd have to look at them to determine which variant they are as far as which era. But yeah, I've got some. I think my India army are minifigs mostly, and then the Egyptians might be too. It's possible.
Yeah, there was a time I pretty much had, I think, about every army you could, Essex or Alliance miniatures. There were the 2 big ones I had. I had a ton of Alliance miniatures because obviously it was here in town. Friends with the owners and John, and I used to buy stuff all the time from him and paint it.
Well, I'll be prepping myself for it with for 15 mil with the battle system stuff for AD&D because I'm gonna be doing. That's one of my projects for this summer is the unfinished business is to do my AD&D battle systems fantasies 15 mil. So I'm going to be working on that. And so once I finish that, that's going to be where I'll be looking at getting some more 15 mil historical. So,
yeah, it's interesting. There is Black Raven Foundry has a whole bunch of fantasy 15s. So if you need 15 mil, I have a bunch of their stuff. There was other companies out there that did fantasy stuff, but they disappeared. I'm not sure exactly who bought them out, if they ever just quit making them. But how that works out.
Well, Splintered Light does a lot of 15 mil right now as far as fantasy is. Curacao does both historical and I know there's a lot of 15 mil manufacturers, but as far as fantasy goes, Curacao, I think it is, does a fair bit as well. So Yeah, so that'll be interesting because I haven't done the 15 mil since the India. That's kind of been new for me. But yeah, it'll be interesting to do some more of that.
Oh yeah, Rika does a bunch. Blue Moon is another one. I don't have too much experience with Blue Moon. I think I had some come through the table in the past. There was a time when I did some 15 mil commission stuff that would pop through once in a while. So I think I did some.
Cool. Yeah, I'm sure you have a catch or a hoard still of 15 mil stuff. Even with selling your stuff, you still have a ton.
Yeah, right here. Big old box of nothing but elves. And I have a box like this of nothing but 15 mil elves. I still have to paint.
There you go. What style are they? Like high elves or kind of style?
High and wood.
Yeah. Cool. Well, what do you think? I think we have some really good topics tonight that we don't normally. What do you think? Shall we get started?
I suppose, yeah. We'll move on to our first topic, which was number 1, was deployment styles.
Yes.
If you want to kick off with that one.
So we're thinking like sometimes games, like all games, have deployment of one form or another, but sometimes certain game rule systems shine differently than others. Some focus on deployment differently than others. Some of them don't even make a big deal out of deployment, but they're really awesome games in other ways. And then other ones, I think, actually have a special because of the deployment method. And so what do you find would be your top sort of games, or what do you like as far as in deployment in games, and what are your top games? However, I could start if you were if you want me to go first. Well, I could start.
I'll just give a quick.
Did you see what I did there? I'm happy to go first. I'll go first on this one.
Well, I can go first. Now, what are the many different kinds? You look at all the different kinds of systems out there. It's like you always have, let's say BattleTech.
Okay. For those that you don't know, I have to take a drink every time he says BattleTech.
Drink. It's our drinking game. You have that one where you can just move on from the edge. That's typically how it is. Some of them, that's the most typical style, is you moving on from one side to the other and just going by initiative. It's like we typically, in a lot of our games, where you assign a card, your mech is assigned a card. So when your card pops up, doesn't matter what side you're on, it's like, oh, my card. Am I freezing again?
You're getting a little choppy. But you're okay.
A little choppy.
Yeah.
Or maybe I'm talking too fast. Or you're drinking too much. So yeah, that's the typical one that I see a lot of, because we play a bit of BattleTech, is that you're just moving on. It's like, oh, your card, you move on. Your card came up, you move on, type thing.
Yeah.
That's kind of similar to my favorite way of doing it, because you never know where things are going to happen. Because it's like they came up, they may pop up, like, oh, they go again. So you see how they suddenly deploy. You go, oh, they're kind of heavy over there. They left what our objective is kind of open, so there we can just bum rush on our objective. They may have a different objective that they're assigned from, like the game master or something. So that's one way to doing it. So that I'll now send it over your way, and we'll just back and forth.
Go back and forth, sure. So I actually I kind of thought about this, because a lot of the games that I like are not necessarily differentiated in my mind by deployment. Like, I wouldn't say I can really like the game, but it doesn't really stand out from a deployment perspective. But the 3 games that jump out at me, and I'll just go kind of talk about one of them first, But the 3 games that jump out at me that I play that have some cool deployment aspects to it are Infinity. I don't have the rule book because I just use the online till the new rules come out. So Infinity, Saga, the Book of Battles I have here for the Saga version 2, and Sharp Practice. Now, one of the things that when I was thinking about it is some games seem to differentiate from the rules themselves, like basically how everybody deploys or the entire philosophy of deployment may be very intriguing or different or great in some way. Infinity, I don't really think that its deployment, like overall, is radically different necessarily, but individual miniatures have special rules in Infinity where you can have, because there's so many special rules for individual miniatures in Infinity. Like some of them have a thing called mechanized deployment, some of them have a thing called hidden deployment, some miniatures have airborne deployment, and so you'll have in your team the option at times to have lots of special rules that affect deployment. And so you can have one of your characters is sort of like a paratrooper, which just coincidentally this guy is. He's an airborne ranger that I want to paint up next. And he can actually deploy in enemy territory. And so the enemy can see him. He's not hidden, but he actually will like parachute into unknown territory. And so that affects, it's an interesting deployment feature. Mechanized deployment, because some models might have mechanized, kind of vehicles or things that they're attached to, they can deploy in further than your regular guys. And then hidden deployment, which is the first one I thought of for Infinity that I thought was really cool, is you can basically choose an area of the map, kind of take a picture or write it down somehow before the game, and that's where your guy is, and your opponent doesn't know until you spring on them or they discover with another special rule. There are other special rules that can allow you to detect people better because it's such like a tech game. And so I think Infinity, I know looks like Very Silent Mouse mentions it's one of his favorites. I really enjoy Infinity. I like I said, I don't think the philosophy of deployment is like this radically different philosophy as compared to some other games I played. But I find that one way to make deployment special is in a game that's like a skirmish game where you have characters, is to have certain characters that alter deployment for themselves, which I think is interesting.
Yeah.
So
now I've played before where had some games in the past, several different systems where they would take a board, like a piece of cardboard, and set it down on the table, splitting the table in half. And then I'll say the table's in here, you're sitting at your tables, so you have no idea what the other side's doing. So it's hidden deployment.
Yep.
And then they'll pull it up and go, all right, there you go. And everybody's like, oh, crap.
That's actually pretty cool.
Yeah. It's, that's kind of like adds a layer of like fog of war to it. And another one, using it similar, is like you take like tokens, right? Your unit has a number on the bottom of this token, right? And you assign numbers to your units. It's like, all right, this token, matching token over on your deployment table, right? And you was like, okay, I'm gonna put these guys over here. It's just like, okay, yep, okay, put them there. I'll put these guys here. I'll put these guys over here. So the other side does the same thing. So all you see is somebody putting a token down, and they give you like a couple dummy tokens too. And then until you get eyes on, line of sight or something of that nature, then you reveal the token. And it's like, okay, that's what that unit is. And it could be you could be moving a dummy token along a flank or something through the woods or something, and someone's like, oh, they're getting close. This could be something that could be bad. Right. And that is something I've done in the past too, and that actually adds a really interesting level of fog or war for deployment, which I really enjoyed.
Absolutely.
And Paul's put, yes, it's a great thing. It's a good deployment tool if you have a piece that will actually fit on the table without falling over on your train. So it takes somebody standing there while they're making your decisions, which I think, it was the same game system where we were doing. It was Easy 8 Enterprise. the World War II game system.
Yep.
This is the guys that did that, where they had the cardboard down between the table. They laid that down, and then pretty soon then they used tokens to represent the fog of war.
As long as you don't use plywood and that thing falls.
Oh, man. I guess that inch plywood was a big mistake on those plastic miniatures. Flat. Okay, been shot. Mom blinds. Angry system. Yeah. Blind deployment is I think a very little used sort of deployment system, because people like to know what the other side's doing. Yeah, it's kind of hard at times for individuals to do that.
This would be my favorite deployment system. But it definitely reflects the kind of game it is, because I don't think I would want to do this deployment system for every game I play or every genre like I play. But the thing I like about Sharp Practice is has a couple of elements that I find really unique for my gaming, at least. There are probably other games that have maybe similar things, but one, it's stage deployment. So because you have your cards that come out as you're playing around, you're literally for the first round coming on the table with different units as the cards are being drawn. And if the card doesn't get drawn and you get the Tiffin card, then your guys don't come out that round. And so you actually have really an unpredictable stage deployment that happens. Then there are rules around it, in that you'll have deployment points, but depending on the kind of unit it is, you have different levels of freedom as to where you can deploy them at different radiuses from it. And so, like let's say the cavalry might have greater distance, from a deployment point that they can deploy, where they come in on. And then your deployment points have strategic value in the game for, basically the idea is that that's where your supplies are coming from. And so there's problems if you lose a deployment point to an enemy. So I find another two similarities, because I know Paul mentioned Ain't Been Shot. I not played that, but for Sharp Practice, I really enjoyed that. That was, when I played the game, that was one of the things that stood out to me the most about it, is compared to other games that I play, is the deployment rules are just really a strong feature of the game.
I was just watching, was it last night? I think, yeah, it was last night. Broken Dice. Have you watched any of this? He's a really small channel.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
I believe so. I think. Yeah, no, I have. I just said he changed his name at one point. So yeah, no. Yeah.
He's been doing it. He started up a new battle system where he's solo playing himself, and he was discussing a deployments. I don't know if it's part of the system that he's playing or something he's designed, where it was like you have columns. All right, you set your army up into columns. You might be 4 columns, and you're marching along, and the other side's doing the same thing, and you're on this piece, you're moving stuff around. And then depending on which columns interact with each other first, then it may be a delayed action depending on which column will come in reserve later in the game. So for initial columns may initially set up their battlefield and then go to town on each other. And then all of a sudden, maybe 2-3 turns later or more, suddenly the nearest column will make it to the battlefield.
Okay.
He was discussing, and I was looking at that, like, oh, that's kind of interesting setup.
Yeah.
I'd like to, needed to, but I was too busy painting because I wasn't quite paying attention. I need to go back and watch that. Meant to do it today for the discussion, but it was something that popped up, and I was like, oh yeah, that is something that is kind of interesting for the game. You have access to all of your miniatures for the game, but it may depend on how long they're going to show up in the game.
Yeah, and it sounds philosophically similar to what I just mentioned with Sharp Practice, in that it's not maybe mechanically the same, but this idea that you may find that a unit that you didn't invest as many points in ends up being first and needs to work really hard in that game. It ends up being like the star unit of your side because of the way it showed up and what you had to do. Whereas the one that you wanted, that you put a lot more points in, let's say that was like a much bigger unit with a better officer, like ends up taking longer and just it doesn't really deliver because of the deployment.
Yeah. Now we got Paul said the blind system is oval, okay, size tokens, about 3 inches long. Each line represents a unit, okay, mixed in with some dummies. It sounds just exactly like, this is a very similar concept that I played with before. Is that in sharp practice?
You're talking, sorry.
Or Two Fat Lardies.
Are you talking about the one that Paul's talking about here, or?
No, I think Paul.
The one that you just put up on the screen?
Yeah.
Sorry, I misunderstood, Rusty. I thought you were talking about what Paul would just put up. Yeah, no, like there is a blind aspect in sharp practice where you you don't know essentially whether they're coming on until like you actually assign numbers for your leaders, and when that number card comes out, you're allowed to bring that leader on the table. Like you're not allowed to choose when you want which leaders in what order come on the table. Like you actually have to choose the one as the card comes out. And so sometimes that's the problem, is if you were able to choose just whatever you wanted, you would always take strategically who you thought was best, right?
Yeah.
But in sharp practice, there's a random element to leaders when they come on, and the leader is generally associated with a unit, and so then oftentimes it's not even just the level of the leader that's the issue, but it's the fact that you invested, let's say, in a big unit with that leader. And I've had that happen in a number of games that I've played with it. But it's like what we said about games. Like if you're playing competitively, you may really hate that. But if you are playing like in a narrative focus and just trying to enjoy it, then it's great. I love it. I mean, that's one of the reasons why I really quite like it.
Yeah, that's what I like about a lot of historical systems, is that they don't really try to become a tournament style game system, and they work more towards the narrative. Mm-hmm. And that, I think that's what I like about a lot of that stuff. And then with the blind systems, that's what I really enjoy, is because it adds a labor. It's like somebody that's actually been in the military, is that when you're going forward, you don't know, you don't sit there with the God eye unless you have some type of surveillance radar that you're popping up on some type of screen is telling you, is like, oh, they're over here. We know they're in that direction. But typically, up until modern times, you're the guy on the ground, the grunt, be with a spear, sword, shield, bow, pretty soon rifle. You don't know what's behind that bush, behind that hill.
Yep.
Until you actually run into them and get fired. So, the whole game system, we're using tokens or anything and blind movement and that type of thing, until it's like, oh, you got a lot of eyes on, you can see something. All right, put the unit out there. So now you know what you're facing. Before, it was just a random token running around. So,
Rusty, in all the games that you enjoy playing, what would you like if you take it like your core games and the games that are in your arsenal, whether it be miniatures you have for them and what games you played a lot in the past, what would be some of your favorite games if you strictly looked at it from deployment?
From strictly deployment, I'd say they have to go back a ways. Like I said, Easy 8 Enterprise with the Battleground system. Mm-hmm. I really enjoyed that. Played a lot of it because it was like something clicked with it. There was, I'd say, Napoleonics, Johnny Rad with American Civil War. It's like a lot of that era, mm-hmm. Black Powder stuff. A lot of the stuff that's coming out nowadays seems to be more geared just towards tournament style. But
mm-hmm. One of the things they've moved from is a lot of them have moved away from you set up everything of yours and then I set up everything of mine, but they moved to try to balance it a bit. They moved to like you set up a unit, then I set up a unit, and they make it more of a back and forth process mm-hmm. of deployment, which I think is better. I mean, like if that's going to be, in some cases it's better if that's going to be the baseline. At least it's a bit of a process where in the end, neither one of you deployed. If you're not going with a blind, which you started off this conversation with, like if you remove the blind cardboard in the middle, and if you're going to go with a visible, mm-hmm. then I think having it end up somewhere fairly in the middle where you both kind of had somewhat perfect information and just went back and forth, then you're kind of usually happy. Like neither one of you are blindsided, because you're choosing your units kind of. And so I think that's pretty good.
Typically when you look at like 40K, That's what they do. Is like now they have the system where you put your unit down, you put your move down, your unit back and forth. Oh, you still have more units left. Okay, obviously you're done deploying, so therefore you're gonna get a +1 initiative for going first. They, give you that advantage for that type of thing.
Right. My another game I like, and this is sort of the last, because I mentioned Infinity, I mentioned Sharp Practice is kind of my favorite. This was really great for Saga version 2, and it's nothing mechanically, from a mechanics perspective, that revolutionary, but there are different ways to play Saga version 2. Like you can have a bit more competitive where you set up, you can have a bit more of a scenario driven where you have like a very specific table and they literally lay out, here's the river and here's the ox cart going over the bridge, and like it's very prescriptive. But there's the skirmish way you can play where they give you a chart like right here, and it varies the scenery, the deployment method, the game length, this like special rules, and then the victory conditions. And I kind of like this because Saga, it's not that it can't be narrative for sure. I mean, it's like a historical, mythical kind of game, unless you're playing Age of Magic too. But it's a great game where it has a tournament feel. Like if there was a historical game that I owned, the Saga Historical is really great to do tournaments with because it's just set up to, it's a pretty short span of time, and I don't know, I just find that it's pretty clean, as far as playing a game. It's pretty easy to play tournament style. Hey, Rusty, you still there?
Yeah.
Okay, I thought you froze on me for a second. I think you're reading the comments.
Yeah, I'm reading comments.
I have cause to believe you might freeze sometimes. And so there you go. And so I found the Book of Battles, not just for that chart I showed you and the different ways to play it, but overall, this was an amazing addition to Saga version 2. It's chock full of cool stuff. And they had some nice deployment in here. I can sit down and play a game, and every time I play a game of this kind of Saga, it'll be different. If I play that skirmish, I have no idea, like, really what I'm walking into. And sometimes it really works against you. Like I went down and I played a game where there was another table next to me also playing, and they brought like a lot of archers and things like that. And then like the deployment method with the terrain and everything completely worked against them. And they literally said, like, they lost the game, but they were like, yeah, this was probably not a bad list, but this was challenged today because of what came out, and I like that. I mean, it makes for, I mean, it's not, I guess it goes against what I just said about it being great for tournaments if you're wanting everything to be completely equal, but yeah, it's still, it makes for fun games.
Now that's, I'll just read in here. I'm trying to remember what the patrol phase of Chain of Command is. I have the rules. It's just been a long time since I read them. I haven't played it other than every once in a while, so, see people talking about it.
I've never played it, but I've watched videos on it, and I've been told that there are some similarities with the card system for sure with Sharp Practice, but I don't know about the patrol phase.
Yeah, that's it's not, unless you play a system regularly, it's like, I think I read something about that, but it's just not clicking. It's not in, one of those things where I picked the rules up because it seemed to start being taken off, but just haven't ever played it. Same with, I got Sharp Practice. I have the rule book, but I've just never played it. But I got miniatures that I could probably use for it now. So.
Absolutely, yeah, for sure. But it sounds like you and Dan are getting into what's the rule set you guys use? Liberty?
Land of the Free.
Land of the Free. Yeah. So you'll be doing. You still have a number of games to get to completely absorb that, I'm sure.
Oh yeah, it's like our first game we played with that. We were like, with its deployment, you set up. Everybody basically, you have your order of battle, and you set, like, you put if I remember right, you put a battle group out. He put a battle group out, and we just went from there. I think he set it up by battle groups with your commander type thing. If I remember right. It's been a while. It was February when we played the game, but it was one of those games where the system's fairly easy, but you're just trying to figure out the nuances of it to make it work. And then, last night I watched the Blucher. I think it's Blucher.
Yeah, Curtis did the video on that recently, right?
Yeah, he just brought one out.
Yeah,
and that looks like an interesting set of rules. I might invest some time in trying to figure those out to for using it for Napoleonics. Because right now everybody seems to be using black powder, but black powder seems too much like 40K in a way to me.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah.
Black powder, just the Rick Priestley Warlord Games black powder?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, like, it seemed to me, because I was looking at black powder, but I just, in the end, I already had short practice, and I just decided to make sure I kind of used short practice to its fullest extent before I started going down the black powder route. And I was thinking about doing AWI for black powder, as I did French Indian War for Musket Tomahawks, but I just didn't go down that route, and I just kind of decided to stay with French Indian War, in which case I went with sharp practice. But it seemed like it was still pretty much about command and control. You said 40. You said that you think it's like 40K or Warhammer Fantasy Battles, like for black powder.
It seems like it's similar either way.
Is that right? Ways. Well, I guess it comes from the same place, but at the same time,
well, you get the same designer.
I was told it was like War Master, if anything, which I've never played, but it's about command and control, right? Yeah. It's about leadership and command and control, which I don't find 40K has much of that, to be honest. Like, I think maybe War Master, but maybe there are other things in it that you see. You know, I don't have a lot of experience with black powder, so I can't really say for sure.
Yeah. That's just kind of the feeling I always, when I read through the rules and everything, because I had the PDF of the black powder rules I read through, and I have the American War of Independence black powder supplement right there. It's always next to me. I always like leafing through it because it's inspirational looking at the pictures.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
I always like seeing really nice looking tables, and it always helps that when you got someone like Dan that has a nice looking table with all the nice terrain to go with it. I have to step my game up a little bit. Blitzkrieg Commanders very similar too. I would say that too. I used to play Blitzkrieg Commander. It's kind of all the same. Feels like it's all from the same love child. It's kind of the same parents and then offspring from it. It's kind of how it evolved into similar styles. And I think a lot of people that design games probably came from the 40K universe for their playing miniature games, and then it just how that evolves into something else.
And now it's kind of all over the place with the Osprey Blue Books and just everything out there. It's kind of going in a lot of different directions, which I think is good. That's a good thing.
Yeah.
So what do you think? Shall we
move on to the next topic?
Well, the only question I would have is, I guess one question I thought of while we were talking is, are there any games, because I don't always think that having like an intense deployment aspect to a game is always necessarily wanted. Like, and as much as I just said that some of my favorite games utilize deployment as an area to really capture your attention or your interest, are there any games where you think maybe it's not necessary? Like, maybe I want a symmetrical deployment in this particular rule set, like for this particular genre. Like, are there any games where you think, oh, it's just fine not having like a stage deployment, or like where everything's out on the table, like to begin with?
Other than playing a scenario?
See, I think like I was thinking DBA we were talking about earlier. DBA for me has a very symmetrical feel to the game, and it has an elegant movement style, and it's very symmetrical in the way it's played. Like you can't be sloppy when you move with DPA, because if there's like people are really hardcore into DPA, which is locally here, there's a really big DPA club. Like they'll kind of have a heart attack if you just start getting messy with your movement of your stands. Like because they play the game for some of that precision, and so like that would be a game where I would say it kind of is just fine the way it is. Like it doesn't need to get more advanced with its deployment and things, because it just does what it's supposed to do in that regard. I don't know.
Yeah, I can see people getting really nitpicky in DBA. I've seen it where I remember playing one time. It's like it's all set up, and I was moving some guys along the flank, and you moved your guy a quarter of an inch too much.
It's a big deal in DBA though, because it's a small scale, right? Like a quarter of an inch.
I'm like, okay, all right, I'll move it. It was like, okay, you're good. I'm like, I don't think I even moved it, but all right.
Yeah, I don't know. I was just kind of thinking that, to me, deployment's one facet of the game, and like every game system has areas that it focuses on more than others. And it's quite possible that sometimes you don't want it to be, let's say, really elaborate. I don't know. It's just a thought that it's not always the focus.
Well, it depends on the system. You look at, let's say, 40K, for example, or Warhammer Fantasy, or Age of Sigmar, even War Master, Hordes. The deployment isn't overly that important per se. Just depends on what it's like in Warhammer Fantasy. I think the biggest thing was your flankers, your fast moving flanking type units. It had some matter of what side you want to put them on, because it takes more effort to get them to the other side if necessary. And so if you're just like you lay a unit and they move a unit, so then they're looking at, okay, there's your fast movers over there. If I put mine to counter it, or do I put it on the opposite side so I can do a flank attack?
Right.
So that was a lot of it. But overall, it's like you look at like War Machine and Hordes. When I played that gobs of games, it's like you just mostly set your army up in a big blob, and then you just kind of spread it out as you go, type of thing. So the deployment really did matter overly in that.
Well, you mentioned scenarios, which I think to sort of tag off of that, like I could see if a game revolved around one side being a bit asymmetric, where it defended a fortification, the other side's the attacker. And if like you do that, then to me, the assumption is the attacker's not going to attack until it's most advantageous for them. So they're not going to wait, like while people are waiting to show up. Like the general's going to wait until they're at their maximum readiness to then attack like the defended fortification however they want to. And so you wouldn't necessarily want like deployment to be really complex in that case. You'd want it to be that I start and be able to put my stuff where I want it to be. And so I could think that there's probably certain times where deployment maybe shouldn't be as random, I would say. I don't know.
I have played total random deployments before, where you roll it. It's like you set up, like where you put down like pieces of paper with numbers. He's like one, and this is like sectors, right? And you say, all right, this unit deploys. You roll a D10. Oh, they're in that sector. Roll another D10. Oh, this unit's in this sector. Oh, this stacked into this sector again. And there are column formation as they're coming on the board. I've played those before, and that was mostly fantasy. I think there used to be a something similar to that, was a deployment schedule where that was very random where your stuff came on. People didn't like it very much.
Did you say that you had rum for this show, or am I just remembering from the last show?
Rum.
Okay, it was rum. Okay, you had a drink on this show, is that right? Just making sure. I haven't seen that glass yet since you showed it. Is it still there? Okay.
You just haven't been paying attention. All right, battle check.
I could do that. I could tip it on my head at this point. So we have another topic tonight, and maybe I'll introduce and I'll let you start on this one. But we just we don't, in all honesty, we're not saying, well, at least I know you've been published in a book with your painting. I consider myself a normal guy. And basically, I'm not there. Most of the tips that I would say for 3 tips for painters, most of them would be for people just getting into it that I would encourage, that were significant to me. In some cases, maybe just a reflection of the style of painting, the way I like to paint, whether it be historical or fantasy. And so we were just thinking it'd be fun, also in the comments, just to hear people's tips that they actually really liked in their learning to paint, things that really stood out to them. But what are like 3 tips? There's so many I could think of, and these aren't really in order of importance or the most important ones, but I just thought of 3 myself, and then you thought of 3. And so what would be like your first tip, like over the years, either whether it be in the beginning, something you would tell a beginner, or even just something that you would tell anybody, it's just something you like to do?
Just looking at the legs on my glass. Well, to me, I always like the first thing I always think about when it comes to painting is that before you even put anything from your paintbrush on a miniature, my first tip is always your primer. And priming your miniature has, it may just seem, most people always look at is like, oh, just, put a bunch of paint on there, prime it, and, you're good. It's not necessarily the case, especially if you live in a high humid summer area like I do. There are times of the year when I can't even prime. So if I get a project and it's like I prime everything outside, it's like, you take something from a cold air-conditioned area and you take it outside, you can't prime it immediately. Because, it's like the condensation comes out, and then you got all these bubbles, and you just make a big mess out of your stuff. So the first thing I always think about when it's like the priming schedule, it's like it's either too cold or it's too hot or too humid. So you got to get that Goldilocks zone. And it's just not for just Earth, And so like during the summertime, if I take my miniatures, I put them outside in the sun and let them sit out there for about an hour to acclimate themselves, literally to the environment. And then I'll put them in the shade and prime.
Okay.
So that's how I get away with it in the summertime. But if it's like above like 95 or something, then you're starting to have a problem also when it's too hot. You got to also do your primer. You have a problem if you take a can of cold primer from your air conditioning and then take it outside, then you have a problem too. So.
Right. I got a question for you, since you've been painting a long time. I like to use my Vallejo airbrush primer. Like I use my surface primer, just the what is it? The polyurethane primer. But I've never done this myself. But over the years, I've seen people occasionally use gesso to prime. And there's videos on it where they show people doing it. And it's kind of interesting because you goop it on and then it almost like evaporates and leaves like a really thin film, on the miniature. But it comes on kind of thick. But then there must be a lot of moisture in gesso because it just evaporates and just kind of shrinks like onto your guy, and the detail looks really crisp. And I was just curious if anybody ever used it, because I never have. I was always intrigued by it though.
I never owned this stuff, so I don't know.
I know it's meant for like putting on a canvas before you paint.
Yeah.
Like they gesso a canvas like before painters paint. Yeah. And
seals the canvas.
Yeah.
But I've never. I do watercolor, so I've never done oil painting. So I wouldn't.
Yeah, I don't know if anybody else has, but it's just something I've always been just sort of intrigued by it, and it's something that you can do indoors really at any time, right, of the year, and like doesn't require the spraying and like all that kind of stuff. And so if it did work as well as some people say, I could see the advantages to that.
Yeah, that's definitely something to look into and see what. There's probably, like you said, there's probably some videos out there where people are actually using it in that manner. I've never thought about it, to be honest.
Yeah, I've always, because I just have the airbrush, I've always just continued to use this stuff. It's always worked well for me. But I've always been intrigued by it since we were talking about that.
So
but
you do mostly airbrush primer?
Mm-hmm.
So you don't do the rattle can or anything?
Mm-hmm. Just I almost exclusively use my airbrush. Yeah.
So you've never, there was a time when I bought a can of that Games Workshop primer before.
I've done it. I've been there. I've done the rattle cans. You know, I have done it, and I still use rattle cans to prime terrain often. But I for my miniatures, I tend to use the airbrush just because I have it. Varnishing and priming, I tend to do with the airbrush.
Yeah. There was a time I did use the Games Workshop, tried it and say, hey, it's the great stuff. It's wonderful. And I tried it, and all it does is flake off.
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, no, this was the biggest waste of money in my life.
Yeah.
And
is it called Purity Seal, or is that something else? I don't remember the name of it, but there's a name. The name of the airbrush primer, it's like a certain kind of primer. There's a name for it. It's not just called Games Workshop primer, but I know I stopped using it early on.
Purity Seal is their sealant, I think.
Is that what it is? Okay. Yeah.
They do have their different specific army paint. It's basically, I think it's from Army Painter, but the different colors for it's like corn red and Nurgle and all that. So you can just Blood Angel red. So you just spray paint your entire army, and then you got your base coat down. Kind of your rattle can and sheet.
Right.
I had a friend. I had the Space Wolf one, and I started using. First time I had a whole bunch of unprimed Space Wolf miniatures. I had a 10-man squad. And I went and it's just like, what the heck? You know, it's like that didn't do anything. It just kind of turned runny. It's like, I'm not sure if that's the. So I ended up. So I just like, okay, I'll do a light coat dusting with my regular cheap 99-cent Walmart primer. And that's what put a little bit and let that dry, and then we came over and with the I'm like, oh, okay, and it's like works good now.
Well, my number one, I think, not number one is importance or whatever, but the first one I thought of was a little bit of an aha moment. It was particularly for new painters. I would say that knowing that it's okay to overlap on your colors when you're really focusing on brush control as a beginner, you're oftentimes wanting to be really perfect with your brush, and you're developing that hand-eye coordination and the dexterity in your hand, so much so that oftentimes new painters, I notice, including myself, will leave a line of primer in between two colors by accident because they were trying to be so perfect to where they wanted to place it and not move into the other area that they didn't get all of the primer even painted. And sometimes it actually, when you use black, it can look like the old GW style where you black line, and that can look okay somewhat. Although usually you want to intentionally do that, not just leave the primer there. But if you're using a white or a light gray, it can really look unfinished if you actually have, that line in between detail. And so for me, there was a moment where I said, even though I want to be really accurate with my brush, I want to make sure that I'm overlapping where the two colors meet, so I don't see the primer underneath. And I think that was something as a beginner I'd kind of come to a realization over time, that although I was trying to be really detailed, and learning brush control is a huge aspect of a beginner. I didn't want to, I wanted to make sure that I cover all that primer and that I overlap my colors where the points meet, and I create a more finished look, So that was one thing.
That's one thing that's kind of important is, I always say is try to get all your base colors in there. Always lay down all your base colors on your miniature and look at it. It's like, I think I got all the spots covered that need to be, and try to cover all your spots, like you said. And trying to be too neat is not necessarily a big deal, or being too neat is, it's not overly as important as getting everything covered, like you said.
Yeah, because there are other stages where you'll do your highlights and your washes and like a lot other stuff where you're going to work on that. But if you try to be so neat to the point where you actually leave some stuff unpainted because you got everything else neat but didn't finish off where they meet up, then it sometimes can be a problem. And so I've noticed that with myself when I was learning how to paint. And even to this day, I will catch that, right? Like I'll catch that I painted that, but I didn't quite get to the edge, underneath something or whatever, and it just looks. It creates a very bad unfinished look to me when you actually are so neat that then you end up leaving a spot like perfectly between the two that's like you can still see the primer,
Yeah, it's because I always look at it this way: is like once you got all your base colors on there, if you're trying to be neat at that point, yeah, you want to try to get it within, like painting within the lines, basically. You got it with your big crayon, but you're gonna most likely, and a lot of times, I'm going to slop different colors of wash on it next because I got the base colors in. Now I'm going to put the wash on it to get into the recesses and create my differentiating colors. And then I'm going to go, like you said, then I'm going to go back over it. Then I'm going to be neat while I'm going back over. I'm going to try to get all the edges and everything the way I want it to be and give it that three-dimensional depth to whatever it may be. Because like if you look at a shirt right here, it's like typically it's like you paint it on there, it's going to be just flat black. And then you put the wash or your wash on there, then you're going to see the creases and everything. And then you're going to go back over and get it on the tops of those where the highlight of the light is shining. So that a lot of people are not realizing that's one of the important things in painting any type of miniature is creating that lighting on board. So that's something. Let's see, what's a good one? I'll just pick one off my trusty list right here. I have 12. Okay, we did. Here's something that people don't think about a lot of times is how do you use your brush? All right, there's many ways to use. So some people will look the tip, think the tip is your brush. How much of that brush is like you have a tip on it? It's important for the tip, right? But you do have a side. A lot of people don't realize you can use the side of your brush as another aspect. It's like any type of tool.
Right.
You look at a knife. Is a knife just made for stabbing or is it made for cutting too? Both. So a lot of times it's like I'm painting something. It's like I'm looking at it and go, okay, I'll just take the side of my brush and go along the edge with the side of it and run my paint along that way instead of trying to use the tip. Because sometimes with just the tip, it's like you have that paint in the brush loaded up, right? If you use the tip, you're going to get that narrow little edge. Like, maybe if you want, but if I'm going to do that edge highlighting, a lot of time I'll run that brush kind of like at an angle and just like that. Kind of run it along the thing.
Using the edge.
Some kind of a tip that I like to use.
It's a tip to not use
using
the tip.
edging.
The tip is to not use the tip. I totally agree. Like I actually think the side of the brush is sometimes your best tool, right? Like if you're going across an edge, like you said, where you want to actually, sometimes when you want to create precision, you want to use the edge of the model as your precise edge, and not the tip of your brush. Like you're using the side of the brush as a gross thing to run across the precise edge, but if you use your tip on it, you could slip much easier. And so it's absolutely like it's like a absolutely great way to get more precision in some ways in certain circumstances.
Many times, like when I was painting these guys, I was like going along and I was like, I'll just grab one of these little buggers right here. I don't know if Dan has seen these guys, but you see this little hat right there, right?
Yeah.
You see that whole hat? I didn't use the tip of the brush at all on that entire hat. I used the edge of the brush to paint that entire hat. So,
no, exactly. That's what I would do as well, for sure. So definitely don't use the tip on that. Yeah,
you don't need to. It's like I just went around it with the edge of the brush.
My second one was more, for me, it can approach to an intermediate technique at least, but I find that glazing was a bit of an aha moment for me. Like highlighting through glaze, because you see, I found sometimes highlighting to be very intimidating, like when I was learning to paint, and part of it is sometimes up close things can look just drastically, if you use like a hard highlight where you're using like solid paint and getting, let's say, a very bright highlight, maybe when you're doing edge highlighting, it can be very intimidating because up close it could just sometimes look nasty. Like, if you don't get it perfect, and, if you don't blend it in well afterwards with like a filter over it or something. And so I found one thing that really made me enjoy my painting more was to learn and invest time in glazing, where, I would get my base coat on, and then I would start doing progressive highlights with thin and lighter shades, lighter and thinner shades of the same paint. And it would just create a vibrance. And I see it a lot of times with historical painting, and I see it a lot of times with fantasy painting. And it's almost a universal technique that really brings soft graduations of softer highlighting up and creates depth within the model without it being really harsh. I think that hard highlighting has its uses too, but in some ways it's you have a bit more forgiveness with the glazing because you're doing thin coats, and it can be a really effective technique that also can be a bit forgiving as well. So that's my number 2.
That also runs in conjunction with, depending on the color of paint, whites and yellows, and even some of the reds, the pigment is really thin, so you have to use multiple layers. And it's almost like doing a glaze. So thin, it's like my Eldar Titan. You seen how much white's on that thing? Green. The green went on really easy. I did the whites first, and then I came back with the greens. But I think I had 7 or 8 layers of white to just get the white down, because the paint's thin. Because white, as you know, it's like you try to paint one layer of white on there really thick, it just becomes blotchy and streaked, and you just can't do it. It looks like terrible. So it's like, okay, using a thin white, it's almost, it's kind of like going on there. It's almost like a glaze, almost. You just layer it, let it dry, let it dry. That's another thing. It's a very important tip, is when you're doing those thin paints, let them dry. So if you're doing a big batch of stuff, batch painting, which is another tip I'm going to talk about, but let it dry before you even go back over it again. Because if you don't let it dry and you think it's dry and you put another glaze over top of it, you can wipe it out and take it off. And then you're like, oh, that just totally ruined it.
Remember, you only have one more tip left until we go to our part 2 video of painting tips 4, 5, and 6.
I just threw a whole bunch in there.
No. You can't waste
the rules out.
Don't waste that. You gotta. We'll have to come back again. No, that's an excellent tip. It's funny because as I was sitting here, and at one point when I was listening to you, I was like, I forgot my number 3 because I didn't write them down, and I'm like, oh crap, I'll have to think of something. But then I remembered it.
You want one of mine?
My number 3 is. Particularly when doing natural colors like wood, whenever you have the opportunity to use variety for realism, it helps. And what I mean by that is, even if you have like a character, like let's say I do the French Indian War and I have a tomahawk and I have a rifle, if I have, or let's say it's like somebody with a shield, I find that even if they use the same exact style of wood, that sometimes things are aged differently and would never look exactly the same. Like if you actually have somebody that has 3 things with wood on them, or a miniature has 3 things with wood, if you can mix up different shades of brown, sometimes that creates a realism that's really effective, and it makes the model look better, in my opinion. And so sometimes the variety, whether it be, if it's stone, if you have stones on a base that you're painting, let's say, instead of just natural stones you're putting on there, then making the stones different kinds of rock, it just, to me, elevates the paint job when you actually use variety for realism, to create realism. And so I like having different kinds of wood reflected. Like in a piece, you know, if there are different pieces of wood. I like, even if you're trying to simulate a different age of wood or something that's, you know, and that helps with terrain too. Like when you're actually like painting a barn house or something, the varying up one color as opposed to just assigning one color for stone and for wood was something I learned just kind of when I picked my paint schemes and as I was learning to paint. And I found that to be just a helpful technique to think about.
Yeah, to go along with that is like when you look at something is, let's say you have your different kind of rock. I think it was Dan that did a stone house that has a whole, I think it was his fortress or something, where he had all the different colors of stones in it. And don't be afraid to go ahead. Just like you look out in the environment, everything's not the same color. Yeah, it's like you take your whole palette, you look at it, you go, okay, I'm maybe a little dark brown here, a little lighter brown, and then don't be afraid to mix things up along the way. And there's another thing that goes with it is that, okay, you can always lay down, let's say you want something that's supposed to be woodworking or woodwork, right? Or side of a barn or something like that. You put your base color down. Right, and then you can work your way up with many different colors off that base color to show it's like, okay, they replaced the plank over here.
Right,
you might want a fresh light brown, like it was just sawed off, you know, from the lumber mill that hasn't been pre-painted or faded in the sun, to a gray. And you look at that, it's like a lot of people always put all their woodwork is all brown. But, you know, you realize that when something's been in the sun and bleached, most wood turns gray. So
yeah, I remember even when I did my barn for French Indian War, I purposely made the door like new wood, like as if the door had rotten and gotten damaged, and then like it didn't match the patina or the aging of the old wood. And so I just find stuff like that you can kind of selectively choose at times just to make a piece more interesting. I've done it myself where I've made every single piece of wood on a miniature the same color, right? Like I just had my 3 or 4 colors for a miniature. It's like, this is the armor, this is the wood, this is, you know, whatever, the skin, and, you know, like, and you can do that, but it's a little more interesting if you can vary it up a bit, in my experience.
Yeah, it takes more work. You know, last time I really worked hard in getting a lot of different colors in something was that with Blood and Plunder miniatures. And the reason it took me forever to do them, because every miniature was a separate, it wasn't batch painting anything. I had to paint each one separately. You know, I may have 2 of the same miniature, but they were totally different, a whole different palette scheme and everything to throw in there. Unlike these guys right here, this is 100% batch painting.
Yeah,
where everything's identical. So it was like you're just going right down the line. It's like, okay, I got to do all the uniforms. Done all the uniforms. Then I'm gonna do all the belts, and then I'm just like, you know, you just step by dude. You're just going down the line, and it's really easy when you have armies like that. But when you get into something that's really colorful, it's like your infinity miniatures. You know, each one could be totally different.
Yeah, it's definitely not batch painting. Yeah, for the most part. So has your drink grown its legs and walked away, or how is it doing?
It's still there.
Still tastes good. Did you get a Dan's comment there? It looked like he had his number 3 for beginners there.
Yeah, I had it up there. You were talking.
I was just.
You were off in La La Land rambling along.
So he says, yeah, YouTube painting videos are your friend, which to me I learned alongside YouTube. So definitely true from my perspective. Washes are a game changer, and definitely agree with that. And try not to compare your work to expert painters. Always try to improve but set realistic results. I think that's true. I think the biggest thing is you have to be happy with what you're doing. Like if you see yourself improving each step of the way, that's what you have to be happy with. I agree with that.
That's I always say it's very important to always have a realistic goal, know your limitations, but don't be afraid to step out. Now, never let yourself stagnate. I'm always watching, because I'm watching every once in a while. Somebody has a new technique, or there was a time when a lot of the stuff I watched on YouTube was nothing but people painting stuff. It's like, oh, okay, that's a different technique. I'll try that. Never. It's like, I got an extra miniature here. I'm willing to, if I could strip it if necessary, if I screw it up really bad. And it's learn something. It's like, I'm always trying to figure out how they do stuff. Expand your horizons.
Yeah. I always think, it depends. I think it's on the one side, there are folks that just sort of are happy where they're at, and they're kind of have a very specific goal in mind for painting. They do batch painting of, let's say, large regiments, and like they're happy with where they're at, and they don't really want to hear about getting off the plateau and like learning a new skill. There are a lot of people like that, and I would never criticize somebody like for being happy where they're at. But on the other hand, like you said, I'm personally like, I like to learn new techniques, and I look at doing new types of miniatures, like the Marvel miniatures with the comic style recently. I look at that as an opportunity to learn a new technique and do something just completely different. And I enjoy that because I find it just adds more tools to the tool belt for later projects.
Yeah. And Paul put this down here. 12 miniatures per batch of painting for him, or I'd go crazy. I think the most I ever did in a batch was about 100.
Oh, wow.
So
it's a lot.
Actually, no, it's probably about 200.
See, for me, I don't think I've done more than I did when I did like my British, when I did like 45 or 50. I think that's the most I've ever done. And that was a lot for me. I don't want to do that much at a time.
I did a Roman army for somebody, 28 mil Roman army. And thank God for decals. Because it's like the Romans are fairly simple because, they were using the segmented armor. So that was, paint all the silver on, and I've washed it, and then a little dry brush over top to get show the differentiation. And then the reds, and then put the shields and stuff together. And then it's like, and the hard, tedious part is putting water slide transfers on each of the shields. And when it was all done, and it's like, I'm glad I'm not looking at another Roman for a long time. And let's see, but typically for me, it's like the biggest batch I've done was like those orcs. When I did those orc boys.
Oh yeah, the second edition ones.
Yes.
That was a lot, yeah.
Yeah, it's like, was there 75 or 80, I think, somewhere in there?
That was a lot.
And I took checkering on each shoulder pad. That was the work. So that was the tedious part. But I even batch painted the checker part of it. So
yeah.
It's like, okay, I'll put all white or all yellow. It's like on each shoulder pad. It's like, I know it's going to be a black and yellow checker, or white and red checker, or blue and white checker, or whatever it was. And I just put it's like, all right, these group are going to be all this. Checker, set them up and went batch painted them that way. But that was like blow the brains out. I've been painting since the 80s. Yeah, it's like that's about time I started painting was in the 80s. And never be afraid to.
I'll go this way. Flick. Come on, Rusty. Pop, 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 pop. Come on. Come on there. Let's see. Well, I started my. Oh, looks like he's coming back. I started my painting in the 80s. I just kind of flicked you there, Rusty, just to get you to get going. But I started painting in the 80s too. But I actually was quite young at the time, and I used enamel paints. I didn't actually use, and it was just totally different experience. It was totally different experience. Like didn't use washes or anything. Like I didn't highlight. I just basic, paint on the miniature to show skin, to show whatever. And so I didn't really start learning until in the last 8 years. So
yeah, I remember the first time I used washes, they had ink washes, and I put the wash on, and I thought it was dry after a couple days, and I put my new paint on it, and the ink went, sucked it, and I was like, oh man. The ink wasn't dry, it's still active. So I'm very glad with these new washes that they have nowadays that within an hour or less than half an hour, they're dry.
Mm-hmm.
That's a nice thing about them.
Yeah, absolutely.
And
you got
Justin,
a comment from Justin.
Getting back into painting over the last few years after half a year of pretty much no painting, after probably a year of pretty much no painting, I feel like it's time to learn something new. And that's another thing is if you haven't painted in a while, you learn that your eye-hand coordination starts to degrade.
Mm-hmm.
The longer you go, it's like, then you realize you're just like, it's like that muscle memory is lost. It's a skill that goes away.
And then sometimes I think like what he was saying, it sounds like, I mean, sometimes we do just kind of we see a lot out there that we've never tried, and we just want to try something new, like just to try something different and get a different kind of effect.
Yeah, there've been times I tried something new and totally just bombed. And I was like,
you have to, and that's like, part of it though. Like that's, yeah. That's the hardest part of it. Like to me, the hardest part is saying I'm okay with painting worse today than yesterday for the sake of learning something new. Like that's an extremely hard lesson. Like, because I think, at least for me, there is a psychological problem that we have with doing worse today than yesterday. Like if we see something come out worse in our head, but we've done it a different way to learn a new tool, it's really hard to actually kind of resolve that.
Yeah, it's definitely something that it's hard on the psyche to epically fail.
Mm-hmm.
There's been times it's like, even when you get a paint scheme in your head and you're just like, yeah, it's going to look great, it's going to look awesome, and you do a test model and you look at it like, oh, what was I thinking? I just wasted a half a day putting this together, and that looks terrible. It's like, it was a great idea in the head, but it went south quickly. Yeah, there's 28s and 15 differently. Yeah, it's like 15s. You don't have to be really precise with 15s. It's like you can go like with 15 mils. About the most I ever do on a 15 mil is like if I'm doing like World War II uniforms, I'll put the base color, put a wash over it, and then just do a quick highlight over top of them, even almost like a dry brush, like using not really a dry brush, more of a wet brush with the side of my brush, go over top of them, just really quick, get the highlights of the raised areas and call it good.
Yeah.
And if you don't have to put a lot of effort into a 15. That's why they can go really quick. Now 28's a different matter.
Yeah.
Here we got Justin again. When I started painting 10 mil American War of Independence, I was happy to use very few washes, mostly on skin, mostly layers. 28 is different, more washes, but also more layers and highlighting.
Mm-hmm.
With 28s, there are times like when I'm working on these guys, these Warlord miniatures, there's not a lot of detail in them. You have to put some major work into getting that looking like you actually have creases in the uniforms and stuff. Otherwise, it looks pretty darn flat.
Yeah.
You have to actually physically paint it in there to create some of the details.
One of my friends was doing some 15 mil World War II, and he used just some Army Painter dip. And I'll tell you, I mean, even though it's like not, there's a lot of people that kind of will look down on that because it can goop up, or you don't get to do, it's harder to do some of the other finishing techniques later if you use a dip on it. But when he did his 15 mil World War II, like the richness and the contrast that came into it when he used Army Painter dip, they look fantastic. I mean, honestly, I would never have a problem with putting those on the table and using them. Like they look great. They looked rich. The colors still popped because of where they were seated, and they look perfect. I mean, like, and so, you know, it may not be one of those things you enter in a Golden Demon competition because you're not trying to do all those subtle techniques and things, but it looks you know, it can look excellent.
Yeah. But, yeah. You don't have to, like you said, create a Golden Demon. If you put a little effort into it, it looks good.
Yeah, absolutely.
And obviously a lot of on a 15 mil, a lot of those small details are lost beyond a foot. So just 2 feet away, all you're seeing a lot of time, unless it's the vehicles and stuff, all you're seeing is the shade. You know, it's just different aspect of color on it, of the uniform. You might see the belt, you might see but you're not seeing the different colors in the creases of the arms and uniforms.
Yeah.
Yes, the old enamels. I remember my first miniatures, even my first Battletech miniatures from the 80s, I started painting with all testers enamels. And they looked terrible. And then I stripped them again not long ago and repainted them a couple of years ago. They look terrible.
I still have one of my first miniatures. Like, I'm kind of nostalgic about it because I did the paint job in like '88 or something, and I have like I showed it on the channel. I have like a Ranger, like a Grenadier Ranger for D&D, and it's just enamels, and yeah, like it's not what I would want to do today, but it has like that look to it, right? Like,
yeah,
of having painted it back then, and it's kind of nostalgic.
Yeah, it's always good to keep a few of your older miniatures that you painted just to show how much you progressed over the years. And it's like you take something I have now that I painted and I compare it to something I painted 30 something years ago, and you look at them and go, I've came a long way.
I was actually thinking of buying that miniature and a new one of it and just painting it like now and just like having it as like a side-by-side kind of thing. Would be kind of cool.
Well, you look at him, it's like, it's not a Chaos Spawn because his eye is like half a quarter of an inch higher than the other one. I don't even have it in the socket.
The googly eyes of death.
Yes, it's like what, like this, you know. Yeah, it's like that's the problem is if you're trying to do a batch paint and you want to get a something on the table that's painted, definitely do not paint each one Golden Demon. You spend your lifetime doing it. Yeah, that's typically. It's like if it looks good from 2-3 feet away, then it's good. That's all that matters. You're best off being happy about it. Now, I was going to say, I don't know, did I do my third topic?
That your third point?
Yeah.
I think you did.
I threw it in there somewhere. But I'll just throw this one in. It's pretty common stuff that most people know about. But you print yourself a color wheel. Or, you know, get a really elaborate color wheel that's got a lot of different colors and shades on it. I've seen some where they have like a GW color wheel, all the different colors on it from, and there's always complementary, you know, opposite, you know, it's always a good thing. It's like I'm using, I got a friend of mine, he was always sending me, it's like, oh, I'm thinking about doing Tau. What do you think of this paint scheme? Let's show me a picture. I'll look at the picture and I go, okay, you're going to need to do this, 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 this. And I'll just rattle off a little, you know, the steps you're going to have to go through to get to that, make it happen. And he's like, well, will that color work? Well, obviously it looks like it works. You like the picture, don't you? So there's a lot of times it's opposite colors on board. And it's the contrast. That's the whole thing. You don't want a miniature that looks all the same color. Unless you want it to look camouflaged and it's ready for hiding in the bushes. You know, then obviously that's the look you're going to go for. But the first miniatures, World War II, Japanese painted umbral enamels. Yeah, that'd be interesting to see.
Absolutely.
Are they 15 or 28s? That's the question I have. Probably 28s. Anything that impresses my children or my fiance is good. Yes, that's what, you know, when you, there's been so many times, like if you go to a game store and you're sitting there playing and it's like you're looking at your miniatures like, I did an average job on these things, right? That's what you're thinking. And you put them on a table and you're facing off somebody that has nothing but an army of gray because it's all plastic or metal and it hasn't been painted. And everybody looks at it. Which army's going to look better? So an average to mediocre paint job versus a gray plastic.
But the gray one has infinite possibilities.
Yes, but it hasn't gotten there. No, that's the whole thing. It's like I'd rather have a average to slightly mediocre army on the table that's painted than a not painted army.
Yeah, for sure.
And Paul said 15 mil. There you go. Suddenly I have a Sheena Easton. Was it for your eyes only? From
that reminds me of James Bond.
Yes. For your eyes only.
All right. Well, that was cool. You know, we could go on forever. I mean, everybody could keep talking painting, I'm sure, and just different tips. But I don't think we've ever done. I mean, we used to have a hobbying topic next to the gaming topic quite regularly, but I don't think we've ever done like such a general, like, what are just painting tips that you recommend? I thought that was kind of an interesting topic.
And I wrote these down as I was painting my my list here.
You could use them next time for part 2.
Yeah, I was just painting my miniatures today, and it's like, oh yeah, it's like take a quick write down a step. You know, there's just a whole bunch of things, and that I just quit when I got to that long of a list, and it's like, there's got to be a bunch more, but it's just what popped in my head while I was just painting.
Yep. Cool.
Oh, Comstar. Yeah. You've fortunately wanted gray instead of, white. White is a pain. That white can be a very big pain when it comes to painting.
As I look over at my French Marines.
Yes. How many layers of white did you put on those?
I usually just do one with a highlight a bit. I actually don't go pure white. I mean, I would mix gray into white.
Did you prime in gray or white?
Gray.
Okay,
so I prime gray, and then I didn't do black, like to do white over the top, but I most often I'll use gray, but I used gray, and then I went with a very, very, very light gray, and then just kept going up a little bit. But then what I'll do is, one of the saving graces for me is when I discovered Vallejo light gray model wash. This light gray model wash, which is really thin, it works wonderfully over white to create depth in the white without actually creating an extremely dirty look, which can happen when you use like a black red, or something, anything. Even a regular gray wash like this will actually make it really dirty, on the white. But this light gray, it's wonderful for depth. Yeah,
I've taken in the past using a glaze, create a really watered down glaze of a gray, and just brush it on there, and then it will get into the recesses just to create some type of depth in the white.
Yeah.
And typically, if I know I'm going to have a lot of white in a miniature, I'll prime in white. So if I know I'm going to be painting something, it's going to have a lot of dark colors in it, I'll prime in black. Yeah. Okay, Justin here. Sorry, missed the early part of the show. Deployment was the topic, correct? We're deciding what I like about deployment and activation. I'm thinking about different ways to activate a lot later or lately. Yeah, there are lots of different ways of. So many. We'll go back and watch it, but there's some pretty bunch of different kinds, I guess, would be the way to say it.
Yeah, absolutely.
3 squads of stormtroopers. Yes. Prime in white, and put a gray, then use a gray wash. Well, suddenly Todd's in the house. Yeah, last night he was doing Todd was playing a playthrough for Flames of War, and I spent most of my time was watching and painting. I was on a paint fest last night, so I wasn't commenting at all, just listening. That's what I was up to. I painted until about 3 o'clock last night, trying to get those guys done so they could be ready for the show. I was behind. But those 20 hours I said I needed a little more. Yes, gray wash. Now paying attention to what you're talking about. Yeah. Now we're finishing up here. Just jumped on. And I need to see if I can find that whitewash.
The whitewash?
The gray wash.
Oh, the gray wash I just talked about. Because yeah, they actually have a whitewash too. They actually have like an actual pure whitewash that I have used at times. I'm trying to remember. I've used it in brick to create that white grout.
Yeah.
Yeah, because it's really thin. They actually have I realize this is really bright on the screen, but this is a pure whitewash, and then this is the light gray. But this light gray, which is 76.515, it's the model wash line for gray vehicles, but I use it on miniatures too. It is great.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to sometime if I ever see if anybody even, we have our hobby shop. It's a train shop.
Mm-hmm.
They do have some Vallejo paints,
mm-hmm.
but I'm not sure if they'll carry that or not. I'm not sure. Yeah, you deployed via you came in late, so you deployed via ambush and reserve. He's in the show. Yeah. Okay, let's see. We catch up here. Oh, Rocky's finally showed up. Okay, so you could be starting something up afterwards.
Well, I think we're just getting ready to close here. We've done our 2 topics. This is about how long our show usually goes.
Yeah.
And so thanks everybody for joining us tonight. It's been interesting. Deployment and painting tips. Great comments from everybody.
Yeah, it's a good show. Good topics. We have a preference of stuff we could have kept talking on. We could have just kept going and going. We could have been the Energizer Bunnies, but eventually we have to, call it a show because it's been an hour and 40 minutes. So we spent an hour almost. Well, I guess it's been 50 minutes on that last topic. So
yeah, cool.
That's a good amount of time.
Well, thanks everybody for showing up tonight. This was episode 15 for the season. This is the most episodes we've had in one season so far, I think.
Yeah, I think so. Because we didn't have a lot of downtime this time.
Yeah.
Because I think last time you guys went through and you were gone for about a month or so, weren't you, last year?
Yeah, I think so. I think that was last year, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think so.
And let's say we'll be back over in your channel in 2 weeks. With
yes.
2 topics. Now, if you have a couple topics or anything, come over to the Musty Wargamers, and a lot of times we'll have
a Facebook
page, and go ahead, and if you want to discuss a topic that we might want to bring on the show, or if you might want to join the show for that matter, just let us know.
Absolutely. And then if you guys are interested, we have the Old Hammer Challenge going on right now, which can be pure Old Hammer, where you're doing old GW miniatures, or it can be just any old miniatures that you pull out of your closet, just old stuff that you haven't had a chance to do. We're doing it in the month of May. Looking forward to seeing everybody's projects. A number of folks have already kind of joined in the sense of, or planning on doing certain things. And like speaking to the devil, I know Dan is already put up pictures of his Bretonians that he's doing. And so, yeah, it'll be lots of fun.
Just what is too many games? I don't know. Is there too many games? They just keep making more, and we keep buying them. All right, guys.
Good.
We're going to log off here, and we'll all talk with you later. See you in 2 weeks over on Palmer's channel.
Heresy Productions.
There you go.
Or just Palmer. Or Shaveliciousness. Okay. Talk to you guys later.
All right. We'll see y'all later.
See ya.
Good night.